Welcome to the Fit File podcast, where you can hear about anything and everything sports tech related, whether that's sports watches, bike computers, bike trainers, trainer apps, and anything that you can use to level up your health, fitness, and sports game.
Yeah, we've got Des of DesFit and myself, Ray of DCRainmaker.com, as well as DC Rainmaker on YouTube. Both of us cover all sorts of sports tech goodness, as Des mentioned, including things like action cameras and drones and indoor bikes and bike radars, all these things we might even get into in today's episode.
And speaking of today's episode, we are going to talk about the new COROS Vertix 2S. COROS also released a whole bunch of software updates with one very interesting feature. Stages is going under the Power Meter and Smart Bike Trainer Company. And then Zwift also has some updates for the season upcoming on Zwift. So what would you like to tackle first on this episode?
Let's see. I don't know. I think the options to start off with either COROS new updates or Stages going under. To me, those seem like the big ticket items to go with.
You know, let's go. Okay, we're gonna mix things up a little bit. So let's do Stages, COROS, and then Zwift. I think that's an interesting.
Ooh, that's a blend. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, speaking of mixing things up real quick though, just a quick note: I am not in my usual spot, as you probably have noticed. So I've got like phones and cameras in weird spots, so I'm always looking at the wrong places. So I apologize for this episode for the printer.
All right. So let's go ahead and start with Stages going under. So Stages is a Power Meter smart bike trainer, as well as bike computer manufacturer, actually just right down the road from me in Boulder, Colorado. And unfortunately, they're going under, restructuring. What exactly is going on, basically, with Stages at this point?
Yeah, I mean, so basically over the last year, they've certainly had a lot of challenges on the customer support side of things. People have seen that. They put tickets in for anything from, again, like all the products you just mentioned, a Power Meter to indoor bike, et cetera. And those tickets largely have gone unanswered. I mean, people have waited sometimes months to get a response back, if at all. And so this boat was going down the stream for a while now, and to the point where I'd kind of put some warnings on some of my reviews that, hey, customer service at this point is really concerning. But, you know, some of the high-level engineers and employees that I knew have known for years there were still there, even if the customer service side was pretty rough. And they were still selling products. But things started to kind of escalate a little bit back in, I guess it was February or so, where one of their kind of technical leads, one of the guys that I've known for the longest period of time since in the beginning there, left the company to go work for Giant. And then around that same time frame, like 3 other people, all senior level engineers, you know, kind of like directors of product design, et cetera, all went to Giant as well. And Stages and Giant have always had a very close relationship. From a product manufacturing standpoint, Giant made the vast majority, if not all, of Stages bikes, something that we'll get into from this lawsuit that was filed as well in the last little bit here. And they've also co-branded their bike computers. The Stages dash units in the last iteration were co-branded with Giant as well. They were the exact same product, just one had Stages on the front and the other one had Giant on the front. Nonetheless, this kind of keeps on going. And then last weekend, there was basically a note that went out that all employees are effectively laid off. So, you know, that went from having a viable company that was still shipping products to all the employees were, from what we understand, laid off. As well, their entire website doesn't show any products in stock anymore. And they're not answering anything from anyone, any media or anything like that at this point.
Now, what do you think led to this, to this situation at this point?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of things. One is from obviously the post-COVID bubble for bike computer companies or indoor cycling companies in particular, having potentially too much inventory. We saw Stages do some incredible fire sales of their indoor bikes over the last little while. And, you know, some of those were very, very good deals. It's not something to keep in mind. But I think it's more than that. I think it's really easy to blame a lot of this stuff, you know, a lot of these businesses going under for buying too much inventory at, you know, the end of COVID and having just too much sitting around. But if we kind of step back for a second, this isn't really happening to the businesses that had really good products in place, right? You know, Wahoo would be probably the only exception that saw them get kind of close on that, but that was different because it was a whole like private equity debt situation that they got themselves in more than having too much inventory. So I think we have to kind of look at the greater picture of the products and realize that, you know, Stages had a huge business under their Foundation Fitness brand, which is where their indoor bikes came from, with fitness clubs and gyms and things like that. And they've been making bikes well before the likes of Wahoo and Tax, etc. and even Peloton for that matter. In terms of that piece of it, that's one puzzle that, those entities are obviously decreasing their purchasing. But also on the consumer side, for like their Stages SB20 bikes, those competed in the, against a kicker bike and a tax bike and others, but they weren't the top end bikes, right? And so they couldn't charge the premium that Wahoo was able to do for their side of things. And then of course, on the power meter side, left-hand power meters, and obviously Stages made both dual-sided and single-sided power meters, but those power meters became kind of a dime a dozen, right? And so Stages was competing against everyone with more or less the same thing. And while Stages' brand and up until a point anyways, customer service was great and something depended on, once you started removing those factors, it became tougher and tougher. And then lastly, on the bike computer side, they made a bike computer that was for it was honestly for you and I as like data geeks, power meter geeks.
All the fields.
All the fields. Like it was insane, some of the fields. I think there's a picture that I'll maybe make Des go find. When they first announced it, I put up it's like 16 fields or something. It looked like just this crazy Excel sheet on your bike computer. But they didn't resonate with general consumers that well. The design of them from a functional standpoint wasn't necessarily awesome. And the mount initially in the first couple of units wasn't awesome. And they lacked some of the core features that consumers really wanted around things like a Climb Pro equivalency, Strava Live segments, mapping until later on, etc. So all these factors, you look at a company that had good products, but they did not have great products. And I think, when you look at getting yourself out of a financial pickle, you really have to have great products in order to kind of get through those tough times.
It was always fascinating to me with this news, just because Stages, it's certainly the one company that I see a lot of in gyms, in terms of their indoor bikes. I mean, I see a lot of Stages bikes, more than Peloton bikes for that matter, because the price point's a little bit cheaper too. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised by that, just because the commercial market or their commercial market didn't help sustain them, throughout this.
And it's a good point that when I'm talking good and great products, I'm really talking the consumer side versus the commercial side, right? So I think they were known very well as having great products on the commercial side of things under Foundation Fitness rather than the Stages side of things. But it's tough. I think one of the other factors to keep in mind too is the weight of the Stages SB20 bike is something that, I've talked to other companies in this realm, and that weight of that bike was such an absolute beast, which increased their shipping costs. And by increasing their shipping costs, when you get into those pickles, you start to eat away at all those margins. And so especially when they had to basically fire sell these devices. And, one of the reasons they did that is because they essentially took their indoor cycling bikes and just spun it around as a consumer bike, which made a lot of sense, to be clear. And it made it so that you had a known good, right? When Stages released the SB20 bike for consumers, there wasn't any teething pains with it by and large, compared to the Wahoo Kicker Bike V1 has had all the teething pains on every tooth, right? And so this is one of those things that they were able to skip that. They were able to skip all the problems that Tax had. But in exchange for that, they had a bike that was essentially designed for gym usage, meaning it was an absolute tank of a bike that was just overkill for the consumer environment. And that means they just had more materials, more cost, more shipping, and all those sort of things.
Their bike definitely sat in a weird kind of limbo position where, it wasn't necessarily classified as a smart bike like we would think of, something like a Neo bike or a kicker bike, but it wasn't like a spin bike either. So it was kind of like, it was kind of like in between. And I'm not sure it necessarily had a place in life in the consumer market, with something like that.
I think it's a tough spot. So adding fuel to this whole fire is that it came out, I think it was Bicycle Retailer Magazine picked this up, that there was a lawsuit that was filed from Giant against Stages for, $14 million worth of inventory. And it was fascinating looking at that, because in the lawsuit, they listed every single invoice. It was kind of open season to see how much exactly, Stages paid for each bike and all that. And it's all listed there. I have a whole post on it if you want to check that out. But that lawsuit alleges that Giant has not been paid for really anything that Stages asked them to manufacture since 2022. So we're talking a lot of bikes, a lot of other units behind the scenes. It did look like power meters, because Stages, as far as I know, made all those power meters in Colorado in terms of that whole process. At least they did when I visited them years ago, but this was all the bike stuff. And so you're talking $14 million of those invoices plus whatever else Stages might owe other companies out there. And at this point, they haven't, at least to my knowledge, filed for bankruptcy. Maybe they have somewhere and no one's caught it yet. But I think the next question is what's going to happen to Stages as an entity and what that means for consumers.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, is Giant going to be involved in that too, considering that a lot of their staff is already over there too, right?
That's a tricky one, right? So Giant essentially has, basically two options at this point, right? They can either wait for Stages to completely file for bankruptcy and just pick up the assets like a vulture, right? Which from a business standpoint probably makes a lot of sense. Or they can buy the Stages brand and then own that entire entity. The challenge to that for them, like if I was looking from Giant's perspective, if they pick up the entire Stages brand, that means they also, if they assuming they also pick up the foundation fitness side of it too, they have all the clubs to support, but then they would have all of the consumers to support, et cetera. In this, not the statement, but one of the guys that went over from Stages to Giant had made a LinkedIn post. And in that LinkedIn post, he basically referenced Giant's plans to go ahead and build out their indoor cycling bike line, right? So clearly that's what Giant plans to do. If they want to pick up either the IP side of it, so patents, et cetera, from Stages, or just simply pick up the entire business, both of those things would come from looking at that Stages carcass, unfortunately.
Yep, totally. Yeah, so unfortunate news for Stages at this point. It will be interesting to see what happens going forward. It does put Four Eyes in a very good position just because they're really one of the only options now, right, for a bolt-on power meter onto existing Shimano cranks and whatnot.
Yeah, though they're in their own pickle right now because they got into a pickle on the battery doors.
Oh,
so
yeah, that's right.
I don't know where they stand on that, on being able to ship to the United States with the coin cell battery doors, like legislation that changed. Maybe that's already been solved. It was, I know, like a pickle about a month or so ago. But yeah, there is, the thing is, like, there's the well-known brands, the Four Eyes of the world, Stages, et cetera, in that realm. But there are so many smaller brands. Shane Miller, GP Llama, has reviewed many of these like left-only sided power meter brands, a lot of them from China and elsewhere in Asia, that are into the market and producing, in many cases, decent products. And the difference that you had, and this is the same true in the EU, there's also a lot of European brands that are also doing left-sided power meters. The challenge with all those is that they may produce decent products from a product an accuracy standpoint. It's a support side of things. And that's where people have looked at Stages and Four Eyes and kind of been like, there's a dependable name there that we know this company will be here in 1, 2, 3, 5 years to support this thing. But now with one of those major companies going away, it's anyone's game.
Yep, totally. All right. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens moving forward. So let's go ahead and shift gears completely, actually. And let's go ahead and talk about the new COROS Vertix 2S. So this is not the Vertix 3, as the name implies. So S, as we were on the media call, they don't even know what S actually stands for. I think the CEO called it super.
Yeah, it was super superior, one of those two. Was it like a joking, like, sure. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was funny. It was funny for sure. So this new watch basically has their latest heart rate sensor as well as optimizations to their GPS antenna. And that's really about it. They actually have some new colorways, which I got to be honest with you, I think they crushed it with those colors. But yeah. I very much appreciate that they didn't call it the Vertix 3. I think there would have been a lot of backlash if they actually did call it a Vertix 3, because this really was the update to their flagship sports watch. But, I don't know, from my end of things, like I said, I love the colorways and all the work that they put into those. I also appreciate that they went to a lot smaller and recycled packaging. I really like that. Yep. And then I also got definitely more accurate results than the previous generation. I actually haven't gotten a chance to watch your review yet on it, but what were your thoughts and what were your results from an accuracy standpoint?
Yeah, so like you said, I mean, at the end of the day, this watch is really just two things, right? It's an upgraded heart rate sensor and a better GPS antenna design. That's essentially it, with the new name on the side. And I agree with you that the the looks of this watch they really nice. All three colorways. I particularly like the blue one, and even the white one too. Actually, were both great. I think I'm just over black watches, right? Like every watch we get is a black watch, so I'm kind of like I'm ready for some stuff. I saw just today they announced a new red silicone Pace 3, I think it was. Yep. So in any case, I also would say that there are 2 out of the 3 of their default watch faces I really liked on the moon earth thingamajig. Though I think we disagreed on that, right? You did not like the moon?
No, well, yeah, I did not like the moon or the earth, whatever, but I really like the space one. And I think I'm the only person on the internet that actually likes it, though. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think the space one looks like garbage. But either way, no, it's all right. To each their own, right? Like the whole like visual side of it, as my wife reminds me, like I don't have any visual style in that realm. So
it's actually pretty funny. One of our longtime pals, Paul, commented on one of our last podcasts. He asked us, do you guys ever disagree on anything? Yeah, plenty for sure. And here's one for you, Paul. Yeah.
So watch faces. But so that is setting that aside. I put it through a lot of workouts. I was traveling last week as well, and just doing a ton of stuff: swim, bike, run, hike, etc. And from a GPS accuracy standpoint, yes, it is definitely improved in my testing. And the thing to understand, I kind of mentioned this in my review, is that basically COROS was really the first of the endurance sport watch companies to do multi-band or dual frequency back, I think 3 years ago now, right? 3 summers ago, with the COROS Vertix 2. Huawei was there before them with multi-band, but they're obviously not in the same realm. At least they weren't then anyways. So they were the first one of like the Garmin, Polar, Suunto, et cetera crowd. And when they released it, at least in my testing, I looked at it and was like, it wasn't always great. It wasn't horrible, but it was just like, at best, it was equal, maybe slightly better in a handful of scenarios, but it wasn't great from a multi-band standpoint. It wasn't bad, but it just wasn't like this holy grail jump that we have been promised, right? And then we saw Garmin come in with their Phoenix 7 and Epix lineup, and basically like 5 months later, and that was when we had the beginnings of the holy grail moment. But it even took Garmin, it took them, I would say, like 5 to 6 months to really like get to the point where you're like, oh yeah, this is a multi-band that the collective royal we have been promised. And we saw that really hit with like the 955, for example, and the 255. And then from there, we saw other companies do stuff. But when COROS had their Apex 2 series come out, a year or so, it still wasn't great as multi-band. And even Polar had the same problem with the Polar Ignite 3, I think. Yeah. It was not great. It was like, this is disappointing for what we've been promised. But then COROS came out with the Pace 3 last fall. And when they came out with the Pace 3, also multi-band, they nailed it. And it was like, this is what we've been promised, right? This is the multi-band that we see on Garmin's devices, and even some of Garmin's non-multi-band devices using that new antenna design. But this is that piece we were missing. So COROS essentially took those learnings from antenna design, and this is what this is all about. Like, they're using the exact same chipset that they used in the Vertix 2. Right, and all the other watches. It's the same chipset that Garmin's using. There's only one chipset that all these companies are using, whether it's Suunto or COROS or Garmin, etc., Polar. What matters, though, is the antenna design. That's what is so important here. And we're talking fractions of a millimeter of this antenna within the bezel materials. And each bezel has a different antenna design for the different materials that are in it. So you can't just like copy and paste, right? Entirely anyways, because you have to make it work with that particular bezel and the screen around it and all that kind of stuff. And so COROS, back in the fall when they released the Pace 3, they said that they made a lot of learnings on that antenna design for the Pace 3. And obviously they stuck the landing there. And now we're seeing them stick the landing here on it for the Vertix. The only scenario where I saw differences between what COROS did and what Polar and Garmin were doing and Suunto was high-speed cycling descents on switchbacks. That's the only place I saw slight difference. So I don't know if you saw that in yours, because I haven't watched your review either.
That's the only comment I had on it. Basically, there were some sections with some trail running that I did where the detail wasn't as fine, I guess you could say. So it was like, with like an S bend, it was like just a little bit smoother. I mean, we're not talking like Apple Watch smoothing or anything like that, but it was just a little bit smoother. But It was absolutely on high speed corners where it would just kind of like, skirt out a little bit. But I did a lot of testing with the original Vertix 2, and it was actually really fascinating to see that, both of them did it, but it was a clear difference where the 2S was far superior for sure than the Vertix 2. So yeah, no, it was good on that front. How are your heart rate results on that?
I would say heavily mixed. It was definitely better than before, and I had some good stuff and I had some bad stuff, but it wouldn't be to the point where I could depend on it for any one given activity. Like there were some activities that did great, and then some activities that was like horrible, but I couldn't really like figure out when it would do what. So that was kind of a bit of a disappointment. But that's what I saw for the Pace 3 as well. Like the Pace 3, when the going was good, it was great. And when it wasn't, it just wasn't. It was very similar in a lot of ways to the Polar Grid X2 Pro for me. Like it was one of those, I just couldn't figure out one versus the other. I will say the one area that on GPS that did not do well, and it continues to not do well for COROS, was the open water swimming, which was that I had one complete failure and another one that was like, it's still off, like literally on the rocks, as opposed to me swimming. COROS continues to dig into that. I think that's just an algorithm thing. They've had problems with that for 3 years now, but eventually they'll get there.
Now,
did you on heart rate?
Heart rate actually was surprisingly good for me on pretty much all fronts. I think with trail running, that was where I was getting some kind of some weird results. What was nice about this was that, COROS sent us, 3 different samples, all the different colors. So actually, on a lot of my tests, I just wore 2 different Vertix 2s on one on each wrist. Yeah. So, and that's actually something interesting. I think that I do have in that review is that I do have results in there that show results from different wrists, and that it does matter which wrist you wear it on because you can get drastically different results. Like there's a couple runs where one wrist was completely unusable from the same exact watch, basically. Wow. And then one wrist was totally fine. So what that is, I think there's certainly differences in our anatomies, of course. Maybe you're clenching one wrist more than the other. Who knows, So that's something that I do kind of emphasize in my reviews is I try to test on different wrists, especially if I see something weird going on. Like, if I see something weird, like, if I see 3 runs in a row where my left wrist is like, all right, that's not great results, switch to the other wrist just to verify if that's actually happening. But, again, we kind of had the benefit of 2 different watches at this point. So, but yeah, I would say for my end of things, super massive improvement over the original Vertix 2, and surprisingly good for a watch of this size and weight as well. I don't think it's the best out there, but mostly usable and decent results for me on my end. So yeah.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned the trail run. I just pull it up right now. The trail run is where I actually got the best results of all the things I did. I got like near perfect, except for one brief moment where it just spiked for a couple seconds for no obvious reason, but then it was good again. Versus it had a really rough time for me on cycling outdoors. Indoor stuff was largely fine, and then some of the interval runs were just all of them. But one interval run, it like stuck the landing perfectly, and another one, it just was a mess. But yeah, overall, it's definitely an improvement. I would say like go buy the COROS heart rate strap to pair with it, but just be. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. It was notable though, they did reduce their battery claims, right? That's something that was kind of stuck in there because of the increased power burn of the optical heart rate sensor. So they did have to reduce that. They still have the highest battery claims. I'm saying claims because proving it can be tricky over lots of stuff. But I would say that most of their proofs are probably valid there for non-solar stuff, right? Which is an important distinction to make because once you add the solar side of Garmin, and I think soon to on the Vertical 2, I have to double check their numbers, then those are more than COROS's claims. But for non-solar stuff, they do win. I
think on Suunto's end of things, Suunto may actually squeak them out. But on the Suunto end of things, I think what is nice about the solar on the vertical is that it does make a considerable difference, actually, more so than I've found on Garmin devices, at least at this point.
Yeah, that's what I saw last year. It actually did mean something there. Yeah. I don't think they pump in battery No. Yeah, so COROS doesn't, unfortunately, put the battery information into the files yet, which would make our life a lot easier. I've been asking them to do it for a couple of years now, because I think it's one of those things that every other company does it, so we can see the battery burn in the files. That way it makes it really easy, like for these 3, 4, 5-hour ventures, just to pull up the data set and go, oh, here is COROS's exact battery burn. Here is Garmin's or Suunto. Suunto added in this past fall, which is great. Garmin's had it forever. Wahoo, everyone else has it. But I think that's something that actually would benefit COROS because they do have such long battery burn to make it really easy to kind of demonstrate this and show this.
Totally. Yeah. And one more thing I'd mention about heart rate is that, everyone may get slightly different results. I think there could, in a general sense, like, you can generally say, all right, this heart rate sensor is bad or this heart rate sensor is good, but there can be, both of us do mostly the same sort of things, like we do running and cycling and whatnot, but then we start to diverge a little bit where, Ray does open water swimming. I don't. I do a lot of weight training where Ray does not. So, and plus we have different skin types and stuff like that. So it's actually great to watch definitely both of our reviews and see the results. Cause I think, again, there can be generally a bucket of bad or good, but in terms of like different use cases and different scenarios, they can vary slightly for sure. So I definitely encourage you to watch both of our reviews because those can change. Now, I think we should probably talk about maybe an elephant in the room at this point. It's like, when or if is COROS going to go AMOLED on a watch? Like, do we think that's going to happen or?
I think it has to happen. I mean, people want it. And to be fair, COROS has put out surveys in the last year or so asking about whether or not people want AMOLED devices. And so, they have to at this point. Like, there's just especially as battery of those AMOLED devices gets closer and closer to their MIP-based equivalents. Like we've seen that with Garmin, where some of those battery claims for the larger devices anyways, because they can use that for extra battery space by removing the way the layering works in the screens. They can basically use that space for battery. I think COROS will get there. The real question isn't whether COROS is going to do it. The question is which device will they do it on, right? Will they do it on the Pace series device? Will they do it on the Apex series devices first? Will they do it on the Vertix series devices first? Or will they try to spin off some new product line called something else, which I don't think would be a good thing for COROS to do, right? I think they've got these 3 product brands that they're starting to build out, and COROS is a small enough, new enough company that building a new brand that realistically, like, they're not going to keep on making Pace and Apex watches, maybe Vertix, but Pace and Apex watches forever as MIP-based displays. Like, that's just, if we fast forward 5 years, those will all be AMOLED. So the question is, like, which one do they pick to be the one that goes first to AMOLED?
I've had conversations directly with their CEO about AMOLED, and I think that their position is still like, they're very much an outdoor focused company, that they're going for that crowd. And that's what that crowd is looking for at this point. But, obviously there's the other end too. It's like, we know that there's another huge crowd that absolutely demands AMOLED. I mean, I don't see them ever going to branching off to a different brand. I would say that it's going to be like if again they do it, like it's going to be more like a Phoenix Epic sort of counterpart thing where I think they will I don't want to say always offer MIP, but it's going to be there for a long time until AMOLED really catches up. I would envision them having like sister brother sort of scenario with a watch if they were to ever go do that. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that going forward. I guess the next end of the COROS story recently, at least, is that they came out with a pretty big slate of software updates. So let's see here. There is a virtual pacer feature, basically the stick to a certain pace during a run. There's going to be optimizations for GPS for climbing specifically. They're also announcing some new cycling features. They have some improvements to data pages, which make them easier to see. But I think the most interesting update with this software update was the new screen mirroring feature that they're not calling a screen mirroring feature.
Just like Apple. Here's screen mirroring that we shall now call screen mirroring, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I actually told them, COROS specifically, I'm like, no, they actually don't call it screen mirroring. I think they call it live activity sharing, right? Isn't that the Apple name for it specifically?
What is the Apple name for it? Yeah, I'm just going to type in Apple screen mirroring.
I'm pretty sure it's
Apple Watch.
I'm pretty sure it's live activity sharing is what it is.
No, it's called Apple Watch mirroring is the name according to the support article. Oh, hold on. Whoa, hold on. That's different. No, hold on. That's a different mirroring. That's the mirroring for accessibility. iPhone workout. Just to show how difficult it is to even find this feature. Yeah, I can't find them titling it anything. That's back to the original problem, right?
sounds like Apple.
Yeah.
All right. So anyways, looping back to the COROS feature. So with this feature, basically you'll open up your smartphone when you're recording your activity, and this can be any activity. So this differs from the Apple implementation, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, you'll be able to see your stats that your watch is collecting on your COROS app, and this can be for indoor workouts, outdoor workouts, strength training, hiking, whatever. And the most interesting aspect of this is going to be for outdoor navigation, though, because most of COROS watches do have offline maps on them, and they're good and all for, trying to figure out maybe like which fork in the trail to take or something like that. But when you're like really in a pickle or really need to figure out like where you're going, you're going to whip out your phone. So.
Yep. No, totally. But I'm still going down this rabbit hole. I cannot actually even find the official support article for what this thing is even exists anymore. So maybe that tells you it could be some work there to improve the visibility of that feature. In any case, as for COROS, so I did play with this a little bit, both indoors and outdoors, and it's still a beta feature, which is notable because there are actually two different experiences, which surprised me a little bit in that. Like in Apple's case, it's one experience, but it doesn't have navigation, right? It's purely just like a screen mirroring of your watch data fields, effectively.
And it's just for cycling too. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Versus COROS is available that you can kind of enable from the sport profiles or in workout menu, but they have one set of things for indoor workouts and one set of things for outdoor workouts. And oddly, you can't use either on the opposite side. So for indoor workouts, you see your data pages, right? Which is great. It's actually exactly what you want. You can even customize it so you can have more than the data pages. Like, it's a really good first go at this. And on the outdoor side, you see the map with two non-configurable data fields at the bottom, right? Basically your like total distance and speed. But you can't see all your data pages, which I wish I could see all my data pages if I wanted to have like a bike commuter scenario where I wanted just to swipe in and see everything there. But the map side of it is pretty cool. Like, they're definitely on the right track of things. Again, I'm not sure like how often this feature will be used for everyone, especially I think until they get those other data pages on the outdoor side of it, but it's super cool.
I really like how it integrates with routes as well. Like if you have a pre-existing route loaded up, it just automatically shows up there. I thought that was really smart. Yeah. I don't know. I think there are other blends of this. It's like we have Apple with their whatever feature that they call it. Even Garmin Explorer has something like this too. In there. So, but It seemed the smoothest implementation of this kind of idea overall. So I have to give them a lot of credit for this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would say that one thing that would make it a little bit smoother is that right now there's still this kind of like choke point in COROS's routing or routes. And like if you load a route or a course in the COROS app, so imagine you create a course first in Strava and you want to get it onto your device. Right now, you have to pull it first from Strava to COROS's cloud thing, which there is a weird delay there. Something I've like stumbled with the last few weeks as I've been out on the trail trying to create courses where it's like takes a few minutes to show up, and then from there you have to manually choose to push it to your watch, right? Versus the scenario of Garmin and Polar and Suunto, as long as you have space in your watch, is they just push straight on through right in. So those are areas where I wish COROS just allowed you just to like automatically sync all favorited routes so you don't have to do these extra steps. That way you could make it a little bit faster to get on the watch. And I think the same thing is true as well for, you might like the Wahoo scenario where they can create routes on the fly using your phone and just instantly push it to the watch. That would be great for the same sort of thing here as well.
So yeah, I think it's, again, this feature is just in beta right now. Like some of the things that Ray mentioned about how the data fields aren't configurable, they told me already that, this is just laying the foundation at this point, and there will be plenty of changes moving forward as soon as they get all of their feedback from it. So yeah, we'll have to see how that actually turns out. I think it's going to be like sometime later soon, right? I think it's going to come out to production.
I thought they said like the 12th or 15th or something. I don't know. Sometime in earliest mid-February, or not February, May. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely have an update on our Twitters or something like that when that comes out. So, all right, so now let's shift gears back again to indoor cycling and talk about Zwift's updates for this season on Zwift. So some pretty interesting stuff here. So we have a new heads-up display design. It's basically the first major refresh in a long time. There's also a new the grade section or route on there, which is basically just going to be a climbing route. And then probably the most interesting part is their new training API, I think. So I guess let's start out with the new heads-up display, because this is the first major refresh in a long time. So now it's actually going to be customizable, so you can see different data fields. You can swap those out to a whole bunch of things. I think average power was one on there that has been making a pretty big hit. And then there's going to be better gradient visualizations of your entire route in the upper right hand corner now,
so much better.
Right now it's like, what am I looking at exactly? And what's even funnier too is that right now, sometimes even if you load in a route, the route profile is not correct of the actual route. Like it's something different. Yeah.
Even all these years later, I've been Zwifting for what, like, I don't know, a decade or something, right? Like, and it's still like, I still despise. That's the only thing I hate on Zwift is the current heads-up display elevation profile. It is so confusing and so unclear. This new one looks amazing. It's exactly what it should have been a decade ago, but it's amazing looking. It's awesome.
Yeah. In addition to climbs, there's also going to be a new pop-up display specifically for climbs that will kind of just like come up right in the center when you're doing like a specific like climb section or something like that. So I think, I'm really stoked for those updates. Next up is the grade. So this is going to be a special climbing specific route. I'm still not exactly sure what we're exactly allowed to say about this or not, but it's basically like it's around, something that you could do in around 18 to 25 minutes.
So it's just enough to really hurt if you had to do some sort of test or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Maybe you got a grade on it, like the name. We'll have to see. So, and then lastly, let's talk about their new training API though. So their new training API is going to allow more third parties to basically push their workouts into Zwift. Now, this is really fascinating for a whole bunch of reasons, and you already wrote an article on it, so I'm going to let you fly with this one for a bit.
Yeah, so this is going to get interesting. I will say that, right? There's stuff that we can say now and stuff we can say later, but this is going to get really fascinating. So what this allows them to do is, up till now, if you had Training Peaks, you can push your workouts from Training Peaks into Zwift. I believe you could also do it with Final Surge up until not Final Surge, today's plan, sorry, into it as well, right? So you could push those workouts over, and that's what like I've done in the past. My wife does every one of our workouts that way, push from Training Peaks. But other third parties couldn't do that. So if you imagine, there are tons of other training platforms, especially all these new AI-driven training platforms out there that wanted to push workouts into Zwift. And this is a case where people wanted to continue using Zwift, but also wanted to use a third-party app for training. So they wanted to pay both entities, right? So this theoretically keeps everyone happy. And probably the biggest one people have been asking for years is TrainerRoad, that people that want to pay for both. And I pay for both, and I often will do my TrainerRoad workout where it's controlling the trainer from TrainerRoad, but I'm getting points and credits in Zwift by just leaving it like passively connected as a power meter. And so this would solve that. And what they're doing is they're announcing their new API, which sounds like it's more or less the exact same API as before, but now just opened up in a way that it could scale for them, right? So as opposed to being something that they manually, did with Training Peaks and a whole process on that, custom development, this is something that developers, third-party developers can sign up to the API just like they would sign up for a Strava API account, and then just simply push workouts over using fit files. And so from a consumer standpoint, Zwift is saying the experience will be the same. You'll see your custom workouts out of the custom workouts folder in the structural workouts area, and then you just go and do them. You also see them up on the, like if you have something pushed for today, you'll see that on the list right there as well. So this will be super cool. Zwift is saying that the first 3 companies they partner with are going to be announced soon, like late spring. I just assume in the next few weeks probably. And then they'll open up to everyone else starting this summer sometime. So by the time we get fall, you should have hopefully all of your favorite training platforms in there.
Now, here's the thing. It's incredibly smart of Zwift to offer this, though, because they're basically saying, hey, come to our party and bring all your friends too. Like,
Yeah.
there's just like,
exactly.
It is so incredibly smart for them to do this. But at the same time, I think it's great for other training platforms as well, though, because it actually, it encourages, unfortunately, it encourages two different subscriptions, but at the same time, people have their favorites, so that's, yeah. I mean, for me, I had many conversations with them about like, their workout interface versus other workouts interfaces, and, me personally, yeah, I do prefer other training platforms, for stuff like that. So I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting too, like with some platforms you get like, points for progression and stuff like that. Like how is that talking going to go back and forth? Like that's going to be another interesting point there too.
Yeah, I think for those, it's based on what I understand from Zwift. Zwift is just simply taking care of the workout execution. So imagine Zwift is doing the exact same thing that your Garmin or Wahoo unit does for a Training Peaks workout, right? Like it comes in and then it goes back out again and doesn't really care about grading all that kind of stuff. So if you were to look at a scenario like TrainerRoad, if they were to do this, I think they're still going to have to do like the post-workout survey on your app, which is what happens today. If I go out and do a TrainerRoad workout on a bike computer and then bring that back into the app automatically, it happens, then I can do the surveys there, right? So it's one of those things where there's pieces of the puzzle that aren't necessarily going to be solved, but I think while you and I might look at this and think of these scenarios where it's, two entities competing, right? Like say Zwift versus maybe potentially TrainerRoad. Those are two entities that are both indoor training platforms. They're both theoretically competing. There's also just a ton of other training platforms that don't have an indoor trainer application, right? They're a structured coaching platform, and they're all about the coaching side of it as opposed to being about the indoor training ride side of it. So this is really expanding out. I think the majority of the entities, the companies that will take advantage of this are more akin to Training Peaks and like Fast Cat Coaching of the world and all that kind of stuff, rather than the TrainerRoads of the world.
I think what is interesting about this too is, I'm not sure if you talked about it in your article or not, but does this also allow a user to adjust resistance using their click at the same time? Because this would work, right? With any trainer, totally. With any Wahoo trainer, I guess you could say at this point that is compatible with the click. You can adjust resistance in workouts in Zwift. So I guess if it's pulling the workouts in, you would also have that capability there. So that way, TrainerRoad doesn't have to integrate with the click in this sort of scenario.
Exactly, yeah. In this scenario, it's just a structural workout like any other in Zwift. So you can use the click to go ahead and increase and decrease the bias there without any problem. It doesn't really care. It just simply pulls the workout in, does a workout like any other Zwift workout, and then it spits it back out again. And so I think it's all good news around.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So what's next though with this? Because I feel like there's a lot of potential here with something like this.
Yeah, I think it's something that I visited Zwift and the team back a month and a half ago or so at one of their London and a couple of different London offices actually, and we'll get into all that down the road. But one of the things they talked about there is that they are trying to increase the openness of the platform. And this is one of the first steps that I think we're going to see around that. And it's been a point that I know myself and others have hammered for quite a long time. That Zwift have become like very closed in a little bubble unto themselves on how they integrate with other third-party entities. And to the point that it was starting to hurt them. It's starting to hurt their ability to get partnerships and things like that. And while every consumer might not see that, I think you might have seen that in indirect ways, right? In terms of how you could interact with the platform and how you could push to other entities and how hardware partners would work with Zwift and the features. You think about gear shift indicators, for example, on smart bikes, right? There was a long time where Zwift refused to partner with companies unless they paid them things, or steering, or there's many, many examples of this. And we're starting to see Zwift come out of the shell a little bit and put in place these things. And this is really the first like proper API they're putting in place that third-party entities can can sign up for. I confirm with Zwift. It's totally free. They're not paying any licensing fee or anything like that. And I think it's only going to help the larger indoor cycling ecosystem, which will in turn help Zwift. Like this isn't rocket science. This is basically the more you integrate and kind of in a way entrench yourself within a consumer's life and all the other devices they use, the more likely they are to stick with you.
Yep. No, and we right before we actually started to actually click record on here, it's like we were talking about like, Zwift is in a position at this point where I don't know. I mean, they kind of can do whatever they want in the sense that they're such the big elephant in the room now that it's not like anyone has much of a chance of like catching up to where they are at this point.
No,
they're gigantic. So I don't know. I think it's going to be super interesting moving forward. There are still certain Zwift things such as the click and the play controllers that, really only work with Zwift. And those are really novel ideas that they brought to the indoor cycling space without, creating, let's say, their own brand new trainer or something like that. It's like it's really innovative to bring little hardware accessories like that to the market that are really smart.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I think this is all good stuff around. Speaking of good stuff around, this episode is sponsored by Precision Fuel and Hydration. They've been a sponsor here on the podcast for quite a while now, but also more importantly, something that both myself and my wife have been using for a while as well. Of course, we're not the most important people to be using that. There are Tour de France teams, NFL teams, NBA teams, Major League Baseball teams, you name it. I used it recently on my hike that we talked about a couple weeks ago, walking or hiking across an island. It was just a great way to go ahead and ensure I had nutrition because I couldn't actually find any other food along the way. So I was basically sustaining on that stuff for the duration of that entire trip. Anyways, from a product standpoint, you can buy it straight up. But you can also go onto the website where they have an athlete planner as well as an athlete support crew. So you can dive into what your particular event is, and you can set up basically an appointment for about 20 or so minutes with one of their athlete support crew that will go ahead and walk through what your race goal is, event, etc. from a nutrition standpoint, and kind of give you that guidance there relative to their products. It's something, again, I used in the hike and also I've used as well in the past for other events too. All of the products are sport certified, vegan, and 2-to-1 glucose fructose and contain no artificial ingredients. And most importantly, as I keep on saying, they are totally edible. I don't mind eating them. Like, they taste pretty decent compared to a lot of the sport products out there are just completely inedible once you get pretty far into those workouts. You can find a link in the description for the free fuel and hydration planner, or get 15% off your first order with coupon code FITFILE. Thanks again to Precision Fuel and Hydration for sponsoring today's episode.
Yep. Thanks, guys. All right. So last up, bonus topic. We are going to talk about Garmin Connect 5.0 finally coming out officially, like rolling out a beta. And
is it a bonus topic?
Is
this like a
yeah, something like that. Cherry on top of the cherry on top of the sundae. So the comments on this have been
flavorful.
Yeah, exactly. They have a little spice dashed in there.
Little spice. They drop the entire bucket, and it's like cooking with my kids, and they're like, "Oh, I just dumped the whole thing of paprika in there." Right?
Yeah. No, and so this goes back to when the beta was originally announced. What I think it was like January or February. It was like early in this year. So
January. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was astounding to see how much traction our content got on this update. And, realistically, it was just like a homepage update to the app. Yeah. But it was amazing to see how much interest there was in that back then. And so basically with the new Garmin Connect 5.0, all they really did was restructure the homepage. So they had this like in focus section with these big cards up top that showed very detailed information. And then they restructured the individual pieces of information like your heart rate, your weight, your, training status, all that kind of stuff into these more square cards. And that was basically it. However, it is a big change from the older version. And, I think at the time we were all kind of getting used to it. It was certainly a big change again. And then they officially rolled it out just last week. And I don't know, with all reviews and comments and stuff like that, sometimes the things that kind of make it to the top of the list, unfortunately, they're negative stuff. And that's really what we're seeing at this point. So
yeah, I think that's interesting because you think about back to January and people were clamoring to get on this, right? And people got angry that they couldn't get onto it fast enough. And then like January happened in February, they kept on expanding it. So basically Garmin, when they opened this up to public beta back in January, they opened it up very like randomly, which upset some people as well, that people wanted the ability to just go ahead and just sign up for it. And you could just like whatever you got selected, right? Like, I don't know, you got chosen, like the Toy Story thing, like remember the arm comes down, you get picked and off you went, right?
It's like, I'm here.
Yeah, exactly, same thing. You can always decline it. But by and large, we didn't really hear a lot of people that upset about it between then and now. Like people had opinions on how it could be improved, I think unquestionably, and some of that feedback Garmin listened to and some of that they didn't. And part of the challenge is that people's opinions literally contradict each other, right? And so there's cases where person A says, I want this, and person B says, I want this, and they're complete opposite things. Garmin can't appease everyone. They have to pick one. I got used to it over time. It didn't really bother me one way or another. Like you said, it was just the homepage. Like the only thing that changed here was the homepage. Everything else remained the same. So once you tapped into something, it was all the same. Nonetheless, they effectively forced it onto everyone last couple of days here, and people got upset. And I think it's interesting to note though that, and we were talking about this the other day, this is the YouTube problem, right? And not like YouTube as a driver or something, but YouTube often talks about the challenges they have when they make changes to the user interface. And that when they have like literally 1 billion users, right? Or whatever it is, 500 million, 800 million. When you have 1 billion users, 1% being upset about something is still a tremendous number of people.
It is,
right?
yeah.
And it's the same problem Garmin has, that when Garmin has millions of users, and they do have millions of users, 1% of 1 million users is still 10,000 angry people commenting on the internet. And 1% of 5 million is 50,000 angry people. And it's really tough to understand the scope of the problem in that sense, right? Because for you and I, if we have 10,000 angry people descending on our pages and videos and making comments, that sounds like the world is ending. But in reality, that could only be 1% of the population that's angry, and 99% is like, I don't care, whatever, right? Or happy, or whatever the case is. It's really tough. That said, I think there are some things in your video that you had, that you put out there, had some good ideas on how to maybe find the middle ground for people that, didn't necessarily like the current design.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I don't mind the new design either. Again, it's like one of those, like, I've gotten used to it, and UI changes, and coming from someone, I've actually been involved in UI and user experience for over 15 plus years as another job. So, I definitely have a lot of experience in this realm. And yeah, UI changes are hard. They're definitely hard for people to get used to. And even though this was just the homepage, it was a drastic change. It really, really was in terms of data presentation. So, I can understand the emotional response behind that for sure. But again, I've gotten used to it. I'm fine with it. But at the same time, I think it could be better. There are just some things that I think are missing, as I said in my video. And it really comes down to, for a health and fitness device. And I think that's going to be the primary audience for Garmin Connect. I mean, Garmin Connect is used for other devices too, like, their bike computers and other devices too. But I would say, 95% of users are going to be smartwatch users, most likely. So, in terms of being like a health and fitness device, I think you really do need just a quick bird's eye overview when you first open the app of like, here's my calories, here's my steps, here's my whatever body battery. It's like there needs to be something quick and a quick summary, I guess you could say, of a lot of those different stats that you can see all at one time without having to scroll. And that's definitely that's one of the big complaints that's going around right now too out there.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. The other thing I would say as well is that it seems, when I see a lot of people's complaints about it, they haven't customized any of that homepage. And I know I am totally guilty all the time of like, new setup wizards and being like, skip, right? And you just ignore it and you never get back to it. But in this case, if you skip it, you're left with basically nothing, right? Like someone sent a page to me today that was like their online GarminConnect.com page, right? And it was just an empty nothing, like an empty slate, like an easel of nothing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that's a problem. I would say, I responded back on Twitter today to someone showing what mine looks like a 45-second little video of just how my page looked at the end of the day of all my stuff. And maybe I'll let Des overlay it here or something just as we talk, to show what it could look like when you do customize it, right? I think that is important to customize it, to go to the little wizard they walk you through the first time that you get it, or go back to that wizard if you skipped it, because you can get back to the wizard if you want to redo that. And that, at least for me, got it to where it is actually information I want to see. It's if I think back to what I had in the previous version, there was a lot of stuff I just didn't care to see at all.
Right.
And now I can kind of get to, like, for me, it's that, training readiness at the top, and it's those training load things that I want to see first, and everything else is like, fine, whatever. But of course, I'm just a different person than someone that cares purely about steps and calories, right? That's different audiences.
No, and I think that's really what's smart about how they went around this update was, I do like that wizard concept of like, here's going to be my priorities, and you choose between what, like 3 different styles, or like health first, sports first, or recovery. I don't know, something along those lines. And then it will give you kind of like a boilerplate based on, that specific goal, and then, kind of spit something out there. So I think that's really smart. I think that's a really cool part of it. But there is a lot of the customization elements, like you were mentioning, that, people haven't necessarily played around with. Like I literally said in my video, okay, if you want to see more of a bird's eye view using the new layout, all you have to do is just hide the in focus section. And then that way you just have the at a glance cards, which show like 4 to 6 different pieces of information at one time. And, there you go. And you can, but it's amazing like how many people commented going, wow, that's actually, a super useful tip. But it just does take more time to make it, to tailor it to how you exactly want it. But yeah, going back to the YouTube problem that you were talking about earlier about the comments and stuff like that, it's astounding. I shared a couple screenshots with you, but the engagement around this on this my video has been the highest out of any video I think I've ever made. So I think I'm up at like 300 comments for only 40,000 views right now of like 3 days. Yeah. So that's a lot, to be honest with you, in the whole scheme of things. Yeah.
No, so we'll definitely be titling this related to Garmin Connect then.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, there is one aspect of this whole update that I can say definitively doesn't really work in my mind, and that's the desktop implementation of the cards. I appreciate that they're mirroring the layout and the data that you've chosen from the mobile application, but the cards, it doesn't transfer over properly to a web interface.
I never look at the desktop. Weren't you and I sitting there one day where I showed you the shortcut to get to the activities list?
For
Garmin Connect. Yeah. I never once look at the desktop view of it. I purely go to the Garmin Connect activities URL. There's a shortcut URL that you can get to, so you can skip everything. And that's why I just go there to download activities. That's it.
Yeah. But we've talked about it in the past. Like the website is that thing that they just kind of like usher off into the closet, right? And they just kind of like close the door on that thing. But
there's never any focus on the website from Garmin from like a PR standpoint, right? It's always like, here's all the new app stuff. Yeah, the website's over. Gotta get out of here, right? Like it's it's tough. It's a really tough balance for any company, setting aside Garmin here, right? Any company on how you balance desktop improvements versus mobile app improvements in terms of uptake and things like that. We see Strava struggling with that all the time, right? And where do you bring those new features? Do you bring them to mobile only, to desktop only, to some blend? I think Strava's been trying to find that balance, for example, of obviously most people use on the mobile app first, but there are some things like route planning that just tend to be better to do on a larger screen on a desktop. And so it's finding that balance is really tough.
Yep, totally. Yeah, actually, it reminds me of I'm gonna have to hound Strava on a few, like, why is this feature only on mobile and not desktop, and why is this feature only on desktop and not mobile, sort of questions. Coming up. So that's gonna do it for this week's episode of the FitFile podcast. So let's see here, are we gonna do an episode next week? We'll have to see. Things are heating up for sure. So we will have have a lot to talk about coming soon. I can't even
very soon.
Yeah, very soon.
It's tough. We've got a lot of things in the queue that we can't figure out if we hold the episode till those things announce or just kind of do an in-between episode. But there's a lot of things coming up that it's like, I don't know where to fit them all. So
yeah, I would say lots of interesting things, and lots of interesting things that aren't watches, by the way, too. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yep. Totally. All right, cool. Thanks again to Precision Fuel and Hydration for sponsoring this podcast. And any last words from you, Ray?
No, I think as usual, you can find this podcast on Spotify, on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, sorry, as well as on YouTube Music, both the podcast version as well as the video version. And some people asked, by the way, about Spotify and getting the video side into Spotify. And I have been trying to make that work. So stay tuned for that. It's a little more complex than I thought it would be. So I have to having to pull in some Spotify support people to untangle that mess. But hopefully we'll also soon have video, that same video feed that you see on YouTube on Spotify as well.
Great. Yep. All right. We'll see you in the next episode.